The doors of the private Windsor summit had barely closed when one sentence escaped the room and changed everything. According to the leaked account, Prince Harry was no longer being discussed as a distant relative waiting for reconciliation. He was being treated as a direct threat to the monarchy's internal stability. And when the king finally spoke, every person around the table understood that this was not another family disagreement. It was a decision point. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Royal staff later repeated the defining statement from that private meeting: Harry cannot return to royal life while trust remains broken. Charles had drawn a firm line between loving his younger son and restoring his public position. Royal life meant official duties, access to sensitive household discussions, and the right to represent the crown. The declaration mattered because it did not close the family door completely. It closed the institutional one. Charles had gathered William, Anne, senior household officials, and 2 constitutional advisors inside Windsor Castle. Constitutional advisors are trusted experts who explain how royal decisions may affect the monarchy's public duties and long-term stability. No spouses, public relations teams, or junior aides had been officially admitted, allowing every person present to speak without preparing language for the press. Charles carried a thin blue folder into the summit, but refused to open it. Those seated around him saw exhaustion rather than fury. The king appeared to know where the discussion would end, yet he delayed the moment when private pain would become formal judgment. William remained silent as Harry's name surfaced again and again. His hands stayed clasped tightly on the table until he finally looked at his father. "Is the monarchy prepared to endure another betrayal?" the prince asked. Charles did not answer immediately. His pause exposed the conflict beneath the meeting. Harry was still his son, but the institution could not survive repeated access without trust. William understood that difference, yet even he seemed shaken by what the decision would mean for their family. A staff member waiting beyond the inner corridor overheard the king's final sentence when an advisor briefly opened the door. Through a documented account later shared with 2 household colleagues, those words escaped Windsor and reached the press. Charles then made the distinction unmistakable. Harry could remain part of his private family life, but being his son did not automatically restore institutional access. After speaking, the king removed his glasses and placed them beside the unopened folder. Anne moved her chair closer. William turned away without another word. Yet the most damaging judgment had not come from Charles. William had used language so severe that even his father appeared shaken. To understand why William's response cut so deeply, the people inside that room and everything each of them feared losing must be examined first. Behind the ceremonial titles were 3 men trapped inside a family wound that had never truly closed. Charles wanted to preserve a connection with his younger son without weakening the crown. William wanted to protect the future from another public rupture. And Harry, absent from the room yet dominating every exchange, remained the person whose next decision could either soften years of hostility or confirm the darkest fears spoken inside Windsor. Charles entered the summit as both sovereign and father. The sovereign is the reigning monarch, responsible for protecting the stability, reputation, and continuity of the institution. That duty clashed with something painfully human. The king did not want to abandon Harry forever, yet every private act of forgiveness carried public consequences that could outlive his reign. William carried a different burden. As heir, he viewed every concession through the future of Catherine, George, Charlotte, Louis, and the monarchy they might one day inherit. The prince feared that one emotional decision made now could expose his family to another round of accusations, private disclosures, and public humiliation later. Charles's deepest fear was not another interview or memoir. It was dying with the relationship unresolved. He knew time could close the door before pride, anger, or duty allowed either side to step through it. Yet he also understood that a father's regret could become a king's mistake if it restored trust too quickly. William's anger came from a more personal place. He believed Harry had repeatedly turned private conversations into public weapons. That history left him unable to tell whether a sincere approach was truly an attempt at peace or the beginning of another disclosure. Anne refused to let either man hide behind titles. Through the documented account of the summit, she warned Charles that compassion without boundaries could become weakness. Then she turned to William and said permanent punishment could harden into cruelty. Her words carried quiet sadness, because she had watched both brothers grow from boys into men divided by grief. The advisors then revealed that Harry had recently made an indirect request for a private meeting during a future visit to Britain. That request had triggered debate over whether he could enter a royal residence without formal conditions. Charles reached for the page and read one line twice. William watched his father's expression soften, then pushed his chair back slightly. He recognized the danger immediately. The king was wavering. Anne saw it too. Beneath the constitutional language stood a father, terrified of choosing one son against another. But Harry's request had not created this fear by itself. A previous private encounter had already convinced William that even a controlled reunion could collapse. That earlier encounter became the point of no return, the moment every person at Windsor silently remembered when the argument over Harry began. Months before the Windsor summit, one private conversation had offered the family a possible path back from years of hostility. There were no cameras, no public statements, and no formal agreement, only a father, two sons, and a promise that nothing said would leave the room. But within days, a private detail appeared outside palace walls. From that moment onward, William stopped seeing reconciliation as merely difficult. He began seeing it as dangerous. Charles had arranged the meeting inside his private sitting room at Clarence House after Harry made a discreet visit to Britain. Clarence House is the royal residence long associated with the king's personal household and private family meetings. No senior aides were present. William, Harry, and their father agreed that every word would remain confidential, with nothing repeated to friends, staff, or the press. Harry spoke first. He said he felt erased from the family's future, as though every role, invitation, and private connection had been quietly removed while the rest of the monarchy moved forward without him. Charles listened with visible pain. The king wanted to answer as a father, but every accusation carried consequences for the institution he led. William struggled to remain calm. He believed Harry's version ignored the hurt caused to Catherine and the pressure placed on palace staff. Yet the prince did not interrupt. For several minutes, the brothers spoke more honestly than they had in years. Then something shifted. William admitted that he missed the person Harry had once been. The younger prince answered that he missed having a brother who spoke directly instead of communicating through officials. The moment was fragile but real. Charles watched both sons soften and believed, briefly, that the family had found a way back. 3 days later, a public account appeared containing William's exact phrasing about missing his brother. The wording was too precise to dismiss. To the heir, the confidential promise had been broken. Harry denied authorizing any disclosure, but he could not explain how the sentence escaped. Charles wanted to believe someone outside the meeting had learned the detail indirectly. William refused to accept that possibility. He later confronted his father alone, placed a printed copy of the leaked wording on the desk, and tapped the sentence with one finger. Charles read it, folded the page in half, and quietly admitted he no longer knew whom to trust. Harry then received a brief message stating that future communication would require written conditions. He read it alone, realizing that one moment of honesty had become evidence against him. That memory followed William into Windsor. When Charles suggested another private meeting, the heir finally spoke. Inside the summit, the old wound reopened, and this time William confronted his father, face to face, with no intention of retreating. The turning point came when William stopped speaking like an heir addressing a sovereign, and began speaking like a wounded brother addressing a father. His voice never rose, but the restraint made the moment more severe. He told Charles that another informal reunion would not heal the family, it would place everyone around them at risk. Then he delivered the sentence that silenced the room. "We cannot keep calling exposure a misunderstanding. Charles had proposed allowing Harry a short private audience at Windsor under strict confidentiality. A private audience is a personal meeting with the monarch, usually held away from public duties and formal ceremony. The king argued that refusing even one conversation would make the separation feel permanent, not only to his son, but to everyone watching the family from outside. William opposed the plan immediately. There was no enforceable agreement, no neutral witness, and no protection against selective details later reaching the public. To the prince, confidentiality without consequences was only hope dressed as security. He had trusted that hope before, and the damage had reached Catherine, their children, and staff who had never chosen to become part of the conflict. William accused his father of repeatedly separating Harry's actions from the pain they caused. Charles answered that a father could not close the door forever on his own child. "I am a father too," William replied. That answer changed the room. The future king said his duty was to protect George, Charlotte, and Louis from inheriting a family crisis that returned every time boundaries weakened. Success inside the monarchy meant nothing, he argued, if his children grew up surrounded by suspicion and repeated betrayal. Charles rose from his chair and asked whether William truly wanted his brother excluded forever. The heir stood as well, and met his father's eyes. "I want him excluded from royal access until trust is demonstrated," he said, not simply demanded. Anne intervened before anger became permanent. She asked Charles whether he was offering Harry a relationship or a path back toward the institution. The distinction mattered, because private affection could exist without official access, titles, briefings, or influence. The king hesitated, then admitted the difference had never been clearly defined. William delivered the harshest phrase recorded in the summit account. "Harry is now a private son with public consequences." Charles visibly flinched. Anne felt the weight of the words at once. She understood that William was not merely condemning his brother. He was revealing how completely fear had replaced trust. The confrontation changed the summit, but the final decision remained unopened before them. Once the blue folder was finally opened, the debate stopped being only about family pain and became a question of institutional control. For nearly an hour, the folder remained untouched, as though everyone understood that opening it would make retreat impossible. Inside were not accusations or private letters, but a proposed system of restrictions. The document did not remove Harry from the family. It did something more calculated. It separated blood from privilege, affection from access, and reconciliation from any automatic return to the protected world he once occupied. Charles finally opened the folder. Inside was a palace framework, drafted after the Clarence House breach, setting out conditions for future contact between Harry and working members of the royal family. A palace framework is a formal set of internal rules used to guide sensitive decisions before they become public policy. The king retained final authority, but William's agreement would be required whenever contact involved Catherine, their children, or the heir's household. Charles disliked the language immediately. Phrases such as controlled location, verified confidentiality, and restricted household access turned his relationship with his younger son into procedure. The king read each term slowly, as though every line created more distance between father and child. William accepted the severity because emotion had failed to protect anyone. The prince believed clear conditions were kinder than repeated invitations followed by suspicion, anger, and blame. Without firm boundaries, every attempt at peace became another chance for trust to collapse. The plan allowed Harry to meet Charles privately, but it denied him unsupervised access to sensitive royal residences, internal briefings, ceremonial planning, or discussions involving succession. Succession means the legal order deciding who inherits the throne. That restriction mattered because those conversations affected William's future, his children's position, and the stability of the crown itself. A second clause made the warning even sharper. Any leak traced to a confidential meeting would suspend direct royal contact for an extended period. Trust would no longer be assumed. It would have to be tested and preserved. Charles placed his thumb over Harry's name. For several seconds he said nothing. "Would signing this make me a stronger king?" he asked Anne. "Or a worse father?" Anne answered with visible sadness. She told him that refusing boundaries would make him neither compassionate nor protective. Love could remain, she said, but access had to be earned. Charles looked toward William, who offered no triumph, only exhausted agreement. The king reached for the pen, then stopped. A message had arrived from Harry's representative. Through a documented communication sent directly to the royal household, it requested confirmation of an immediate private meeting before the prince's next public appearance in Britain. The message arrived before Windsor had reached its verdict, and its wording made the summit's private fears feel suddenly immediate. Harry did not hear the summit's conclusion from his father. He heard it through a formal message stripped of warmth, history, and apology. The words did not say that he had been abandoned. They told him something almost as painful. Future contact would continue, but only inside boundaries designed by people who no longer trusted him. For a man who believed he had spent years demanding honesty, the response felt like an official declaration of suspicion. Harry's representative had contacted the royal household during the Windsor summit, asking whether the prince could meet Charles privately on his next visit to Britain. The timing forced the discussion into immediate action. The king could no longer debate a future possibility. He had to decide what kind of relationship he was prepared to offer now. Charles approved the meeting, but the new framework came with conditions. The conversation would take place at a neutral location. Attendance would remain limited, private royal offices would be closed, and both sides would accept a written confidentiality understanding. That document was a formal promise that nothing discussed could be shared without permission. To the monarch, those boundaries protected a fragile bond. To Harry, they turned a family reunion into a controlled appointment. Harry read the message twice. He placed his phone face down and walked away from the table. Minutes later, he returned and asked for the wording to be read aloud. His representative repeated every condition slowly. When the final restriction was spoken, the younger prince remained silent. Humiliation rose beneath the silence. Harry believed he was being treated like an outside visitor, rather than the king's son. Charles saw the same rules differently. Without them, he feared the relationship would collapse under suspicion before either man had the chance to speak honestly. Harry considered refusing the meeting. Then one sentence changed his reaction. Charles had personally requested that the encounter remain father to son, rather than sovereign to prince. A sovereign is the reigning monarch, acting through royal authority, while the private request meant the king wanted no ceremony, no official role, and no public performance between them. Inside Windsor, another warning arrived. Staff discovered that details from the summit were already circulating among a narrow household circle. The palace had created restrictions to prevent a leak while its own discussion was escaping. Charles later learned that Harry had not rejected the offer. He had asked for time. The king's shoulders lowered with relief, but William remained unmoved. Accepting contact, the prince believed, was not the same as accepting responsibility. The crisis still stood close to permanent separation. Yet once the officials departed, the meaning of the decision began to shift. After the officials left, father and son remained alone and without advisors between them. The truth sounded very different. When the doors closed and the advisors disappeared, the crown briefly vanished from the room. Charles was no longer speaking as sovereign, and William was no longer answering as heir. They were simply a father and son confronting what Harry's absence had done to both of them. In that quieter space, William admitted something no formal summit could have extracted. He did not want his brother erased. He wanted the fear surrounding him to end. Charles had asked William to remain after the others left. Anne understood what he was trying to do and withdrew without argument, removing the institutional buffer that had shaped every earlier exchange. The king then admitted that he accepted the restrictions inside the blue folder, but feared Harry would read them only as rejection. A sovereign is the reigning monarch, acting through official authority. Yet in that moment, Charles wanted his younger son to hear the message from a father rather than from the crown. William admitted that duty was not the only force driving him. Grief was there too. He missed his brother, but every memory of closeness now carried the fear that one private sentence might later become public. That fear had changed affection into caution, and conversation into risk. Charles confessed that he had delayed setting firm boundaries because he was terrified of losing Harry completely. His hesitation had left William looking colder and more unforgiving, while the king remained the parent still offering another chance. The prince listened without defending himself. He understood that the softer position had often belonged to Charles because the harder consequences had fallen on everyone else. Charles moved from the head of the table and sat beside William rather than opposite him. "If every condition is accepted," he asked, "will you support the meeting?" William remained silent for a long moment. Then he said yes. The answer did not erase his fear. He added one condition beyond the formal framework. Harry had to acknowledge privately that trust had been damaged, even if he rejected responsibility for every disclosure. William was not demanding public humiliation. He wanted proof that his brother understood why the walls existed. Charles agreed to deliver that request himself. No lawyers, no staff, no carefully shaped message. For the first time, the restrictions began to feel less like punishment and more like a possible route back. William felt no relief, only cautious resolve. He knew agreeing exposed him to disappointment, but refusing would make reconciliation impossible by design. Before Charles could contact Harry, news of the summit escaped. The compromise was suddenly no longer private. The palace had finally found a fragile private compromise, only for the outside world to turn it into a public verdict. By sunrise, the words spoken behind Windsor's closed doors had become a public weapon. The family's attempt to create a controlled path toward private contact was reduced to one brutal idea. Harry had been judged untrustworthy by his own father and brother. Commentators chose sides within minutes. Crowds gathered, headlines hardened, and the emotional complexity of the summit disappeared beneath a single question: had the monarchy protected itself or abandoned one of its own? Broadcasters repeated Charles's declaration that Harry could not return to royal life while trust remained broken. Royal life meant official duties, privileged access, internal briefings, and the authority to represent the crown. Palace officials refused to discuss private family conversations, but they confirmed that no formal return to working duties was being considered. That distinction mattered, yet the public heard only exclusion. Harry's supporters accused the institution of valuing control more than reconciliation. Others argued that years of public disclosures had made boundaries unavoidable. The debate became fierce, because both sides believed they were defending something sacred. One defended a son's place inside his family, while the other defended trust as the foundation of royal responsibility. Charles watched the coverage with growing distress. The king had tried to separate personal contact from public restoration, but the leak erased that difference. William reacted with anger. The prince saw yet another private discussion transformed into spectacle before any healing could begin, confirming the very fear that had shaped his resistance. Outside Windsor Castle, a small crowd gathered beneath umbrellas while television crews broadcast live. One woman held a handwritten sign reading, "A son is still a son." Nearby, another visitor placed white flowers near the gate, with a note saying, "Trust must work both ways." The two messages captured the division more clearly than any commentator. A national newspaper deepened the crisis with a front page dominated by a closed castle door beneath the headline, "Harry, family, but not royal." The image turned a complicated family boundary into a symbol of exile. Palace investigators soon discovered that the leak had spread through informal staff conversation rather than an authorized briefing. The person responsible had repeated fragments without knowing about the final private agreement between Charles and William. The public had judged an unfinished story. Harry saw the headline before receiving his father's personal explanation. He felt condemned before he had been heard. Yet he released no statement. For once, he did not answer the monarchy through the media. That silence gave Charles one final chance. With the world already delivering its judgment, the king made the only call that could determine what the summit truly meant. The final outcome was neither a royal restoration nor a permanent exile. It was more honest than either. Charles called Harry directly and told him that the leaked sentence was true. Trust remained broken, and royal life would not be reopened. But the king also made clear that the door between father and son had not been sealed. The crown would have boundaries. The family would still have a chance. And for the first time, neither relationship would be confused with the other. Charles spoke without advisors, representatives, or a prepared public statement. Harry would not resume formal duties, regain automatic access to protected residences, or enter sensitive institutional discussions. Formal royal duties meant official work carried out on behalf of the monarch, with access to private planning and public authority. The decision mattered because it ended the assumption that family reconciliation would automatically restore privilege. The king also confirmed that a private meeting would take place under agreed conditions. It would remain personal, confidential, and completely separate from titles, roles, or public rehabilitation. Harry listened in silence before admitting that the restrictions were painful. Yet he did not refuse them. For the first time, the younger prince accepted that seeing his father required acknowledging the consequences of damaged trust. William supported the meeting after receiving one firm assurance: no discussion involving Catherine, their children, or the monarchy's future would take place without his knowledge. The prince was not asking to control every word between father and son. He was protecting the people whose lives had repeatedly been pulled into a conflict they had not created. Charles ended the call and returned to the blue folder. He signed the framework, making the boundaries official. Then he took a separate sheet of paper and wrote Harry a private note in his own hand. The formal document protected the institution. The personal message addressed his son. Anne watched him leave carrying both. She understood that the summit had never truly questioned whether Harry remained loved. It had asked whether love could continue without granting unrestricted access to the machinery and private lives of the monarchy. William's severe words had not demanded that his brother be erased. They insisted that reconciliation could no longer depend on everyone else pretending they did not fear another exposure. Harry's silence after the decision mattered too. He chose not to answer pain with immediate retaliation. The Windsor summit closed his assumed path back into royal life, but it did not remove his place within his father's heart. The monarchy chose boundaries over denial. William chose cautious possibility over permanent rejection, and Harry allowed the first fragile chance to survive. The leak exposed a family at its most divided, but the final decision revealed something stronger. Reconciliation could survive only when love stopped pretending that trust had never been broken. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.